igual DJ SOUT estudió en diseño gráfico en la Universidad Tecnológica de Texas, donde fue honrado como exalumno distinguido. Comenzó su carrera en el diseño gráfico en 1981 trabajando para Robert A. Wilson Association. Y en 1998, la revista American Photo seleccionó a DJ como una de las 100 mejores personas importantes en la fotografía. En enero del 2000, DJ comenzó su trayectoria en la agencia PENTRAGRAM. Su trabajo ha sido reconocido y está representado en varias colecciones permanentes, incluidas National Design Museum en New York, el Museo de Bellas Artes de Houston, Museo de Arte de Dallas y la colección de fotografía del Sudoeste y México en las colecciones Wycliffe en la Universidad Estatal de Texas. Por favor, les pido un fuerte aplauso para DJ SOUT.
Buenos días. That's about the only Spanish I know, so I'm sorry. I'm really excited to be here. I've never been to Mexico City before, so I just got here yesterday afternoon, and I haven't seen much of it. I know it's a really big city, but I have been to Monterrey several times, and I've been to Chihuahua, and I've been to kind of all over. I've just never made it to Mexico City. So let's see if we're ready to start here. Okay. Sure. Yeah. I think she's going to have to change it because we don't have a remote. So. I have been a Pentagram partner going on 19 years. Before that, I was art director of Texas Monthly magazine in Austin, and that's where I live today. I had a book that came out just recently, and there was a filmmaker in New York that put together a little film, and this is just the beginning of it. I just wanted to show this. Okay.
There's something about living in a big empty space where people are few and distant under a great sky and a wind that never seems to rest. There is something about that big country that not only tells an individual how small he is, but steadily tells him who he is.
If I was introducing DJ to someone, I will always say, well, he's a Texan. I think some people resist stereotyping, and I think in a funny way, DJ SOUT revels in stereotyping.
I was born in Alpine, Texas, which is a tiny little town out in West Texas, in an area called the Big Bend. My father played baseball there for about 3 years for a semi-pro baseball team. And then he became an officer in the Marine Corps, and I moved every single year of my life. So I was always a new kid on the block. And my dad was also a sports writer. Through his encouragement, every little town that we moved to, I would do a newspaper. Or, when I started school, I would, ask the school if they had a newspaper. And if they didn't, then I would start one. That's when I really learned that a great way to make friends was to put together a newspaper staff. Because then you had a bunch of people that were kind of forced to hang around.
Okay. So that's just the beginning of it. And so, if you can switch it, take my hat off here. I did a presentation at a big design conference called Design in Daba in South Africa a couple of years ago, and Stefan Sagmeister, after my presentation, said, I want to give you some tips about presenting. And one of his main tips was don't wear a cowboy hat on stage because it throws shadow on your face. And so I learned something from Stefan Sagmeister. Anyway, so at the beginning of that film, that was Michael Beirut, one of my graphic design partners. He's in the New York office. Michael is a mentor of mine, and he's a great partner. And so his book came out at the same time as my book did. I didn't even know he was working on a book, actually. But there was an article that came out when my book came out, and it said that the headline was DJ Stout, the man who designed Texas. So I didn't actually design Texas, but that was the headline. And then there was an article in the New York Times about Michael's book, and it said, Michael Beirut, the man who designed Manhattan. So in a classic Texas way, I called him up and I said, I designed this big giant state. All you designed was that little island, that little Manhattan island. So it was great that when our books came out, the New York Times actually did, in the New York Times book review, they reviewed my book and Michael's at the same time. So I was very proud of that. And so this is what the book looks like. It really covers 30 years of my graphic design career. I've actually been a designer going on 40 years, but we decided that the book would just cover magazines and books and publication design, old-fashioned publication design. When I joined Texas Monthly in 1986, this was my very first cover. And as you can tell, it's very dated. But I had never designed a magazine before. And so when this magazine, before it came out, everybody on the staff was really worried about it because it's a newsstand magazine. And so when it came out, because it's this sort of salacious story about a doctor who was killing people, sort of a classic Texas Monthly story, it became the best-selling issue in the history of Texas Monthly. So that was my very first magazine cover. That little cover that you see there over in the corner, that was my second cover, which then became the worst-selling issue in the history of the magazine. So I did the best-selling and the worst-selling right in a row. And what you're looking at right here is I'm presenting, these are actual spreads or actual pages from my book. That's why it has all the text. But as you can tell, I actually wrote a lot in this book. And I have a whole new appreciation for writing. I've been designing, like I said, going on 40 years, but I think writing is really, really, really hard to do. So one of the covers that I did that has become sort of famous in Texas was Ann Richards was our much beloved governor, and she was really riding high. She was doing really great, and so I was in an editorial meeting, and there was a lot of discussion that maybe Ann Richards could be the first female president of the United States. I had seen an article in the newspaper where Ann Richards said that she wanted to learn how to ride a Harley Davidson for her 65th birthday. That's very classic Ann Richards. So I had this idea of putting her on a motorcycle. And so this is when Texas Monthly had their 40th anniversary, they asked the readers what was their most beloved cover, and this was the cover. That little picture is a picture of me on the motorcycle. You can switch it. I had a little longer hair back then, and it wasn't great. And so this cover actually was a fake cover, and of Anne. She loved it. She has now passed away. But I actually called her office, and she really wanted to do it, but she was too busy. So she said, "Why don't you just fake it?" So we photographed a body double and then we stripped her head in there. But this was way before Photoshop and stuff, so it caused this big national, international discussion about doing fake photography. Now, of course, you know, people are used to it. So in the book, I talk about other things like Alfred E. Newman, who was this personality, kind of a fake character from Mad Magazine. And when I was growing up, I was very influenced by Mad Magazine. I think I got my whole sense of humor from that publication. So I really love this character. His name is Alfred E. Newman. So I did him I did Land's End catalogs for many years. So I used him on the cover of that. And then I also did a cover when Ross Perot was running for president, a Texas Monthly cover. You got it? Okay. Got the technology going. So now at Pentagram, I have my office in Austin. I'm one of 20 partners of Pentagram. We have a big office in London. We have a big office in New York. We have one in San Francisco, one in Berlin, and then my Austin office. I have 8 designers, and we do a lot of interactive design. We do websites. We do apps. We do package design. We do a little bit of everything. And branding and identity. But the thing I still really love is magazine design. I do a lot of magazines. This was also from Texas Monthly. It was a feature about these kids that were bored, and they walked into a farmer's field, and they, just for the fun of it, they killed a horse, and they stabbed it with sticks, and it was just this gruesome thing. And so I hired an illustrator named Matt Mahiran who did that illustration. And then I did this hand-drawn type. And I wanted the type to communicate the idea of this horrific event, that it was by children. So I wanted it to look childlike, but also I wanted it to look kind of violent. And so in my book is set up kind of like an encyclopedia. It's set up by subject matter. So this is a spread from the animal section. And so this was, we've done a lot of work for the Texas Book Festival. This was a poster and a series of bookmarks that we did, working with an illustrator named Mark Burkhart. There had been a bunch of wildfires out in West Texas, where I'm from. You saw it in the beginning there, then from the Big Bend area, which is far West Texas. They had a bunch of fires, so I wanted to do this illustration of this horse running across the plains on fire. I've done all kinds of different magazines. I've done magazines for lawyers. I've done magazines for about wildlife. I've done magazines, all kinds of agriculture magazines. And so this was a dairy magazine where they actually called me and said, we don't have a very good budget, but we would love for you to design our dairy magazine. And so I had this idea just to do these portraits of cows, because what they were doing was photographing, the writers were photographing these really disgusting things like the cow disease and stuff like that, putting them on the cover. So I convinced them to do this. Well, I hired this great photographer who photographed all these cows, and they were able to use these images for like 2 years. And it was just like a one-day photo shoot. So just to show you a little art direction in action, here's a little clip that somebody took from the photo shoot. That's the photographer. His name is Randall Ford. It's hard to get cows to pay attention. also, I don't know if you guys ever heard of a thing called Cow Parade. It's a fundraising event. They have them all over the world. I saw one actually in Paris. I saw one in London. They have these life-size cows that are made out of fiberglass, and they bring them to a city, and then the city invites artists to go and paint them, and they can do whatever they want to with them. And then at the end, they put these cows all over town, and then they sell them and they raise money. Well, they did it in Austin. They asked me if I would do one, and I'm always about trying to do something that's about place. I'm all about, I think everything that's great comes from a particular place. So as you can tell, a lot of my work has to do with Texas, but also a lot of it has to do with Austin, Texas. Austin is the home of the largest urban bat colony. And these bats, the Mexican free-tailed bats, they live under this bridge right here, which is the Congress Avenue Bridge in the middle of the city. So it's a tourist attraction. People go there and they watch all these bats fly out. So I had the idea of turning one of the cows into a bat. And so I had to call the city. I had to talk to about 30 people to convince them to let me turn this, one of the cows. There's one that was laying down cow, and I turned it into a Mexican free-tailed bat and hung it upside down. So that's a picture of the actual bat, what we call bat cow, hanging under the bridge. I'm actually one of those people up on the top there. You can see the bats flying out. So of course we did a poster, and we did our own little bat cow logo. And then, I've also, because at Texas Monthly, we did a lot of work about animals, So this was a story about rattlesnakes. This is a recent book that I did for an Austin musician. Austin is known as kind of the live music capital of the world. So we did these photographs out in an area near Alpine, near the Big Bend National Park. This is another spread from the book. This was a piece I did where I hired all these illustrators to illustrate parts of poems and excerpts from books. And this was for like National Book Month or something like that. So I hired all these illustrators, and I wanted to use the best illustrators in the world. So some of these illustrators were living in London and Germany and whatnot. I gave them all a year to do this assignment. They all waited till the very last week to do it, which is pretty typical. So as you can see here, here's a spread where I talk about illustration. I've used lots of illustrators over the years, and illustrators are some of my best friends. I really love illustration. I wanted to be an illustrator at one point. This is another example of sort of embracing your culture or where you're from. The magazine wanted to do, Texas Monthly wanted to do a fashion piece about cowboy boots. And these were in particular about some boots that were being made in El Paso. So I was in New York and I saw this photograph by William Whitman, a very famous photographer, where he had photographed his dog, which was named Fay Ray, wearing roller skates. And I saw it at the Museum of Modern Art. So I had the idea to photograph the dog wearing cowboy boots. So, long story short, I tracked him down. I got him to photograph his dog wearing the cowboy boots. And when this piece came out that year, my editors all thought I was crazy, but it won the National Magazine Award, which is a really, really big award in the magazine world. So we continue to work on all kinds of magazines at Pentagram. We created the design of this magazine. It's called World Wildlife, and this is for the World Wildlife Fund, which is based in Washington, D.C. And they're concerned about saving animals all over the world. The cover is always like a detail of an animal, like of the skin, or sometimes like the tusk or whatever. And then when you open up the magazine, it reveals what that animal is. So it's just a kind of a different cover format. And this is a spread inside World Wildlife. It's about these endangered monkeys in Africa. So here we're actually using a stock photograph of these monkeys, and we just had the idea of putting the universal no symbol through the monkey, because the monkey's disappearing. Back to my own community, I've done a lot of work for restaurants and branding and signage, and this was there are now 4 or 5 of these restaurants in Austin. It's a fried chicken place, so it's called Lucy's Fried Chicken. And so the owner, he said, I really want to do like a kind of a 1940s pinup girl on the sign. And he had named the restaurant after his grandmother. And when we did these designs, I said, this kind of a little sexy for your grandmother, don't you think? And he said, well, you should have seen my grandmother. And then this is a company out of Vancouver that we do we do label design, and we just redesigned the packaging, which this is the old containers, but we just created some brand new containers. I worked with one of my industrial design partners in London to do that. But what this is for is it's a company that makes all these products for growing indoors, basically, mostly growing pot is really what it is, hydroponics. But we had a lot of fun with it. Kind of use the illustrator, Mark Burkhart, to do these. Then back to Texas Monthly. This was a story about a sheriff down on the border who was smuggling drugs across the border. It's one of those stories where at the magazine, as an art director, I didn't have any resources. I couldn't photograph the guy because he'd been arrested. I didn't have anything to photograph. So one of my staff members, her dad had been a sheriff, so I asked him to bring in a sheriff badge. Then another one of my staff members, I asked him to bring in the pot leaf. And so then just kind of did. Sometimes when you're forced to come up with a solution, it forces you to really use your abilities as a designer, and sometimes you come up with something even better. This was a story, a photographer who was actually born on the border. His name is Max Aguilera Helwig. His mother was from Juarez, his dad was from El Paso. He wanted to go down, travel down the border and take photographs with a large format camera. So he went all the way down the border, and this is the piece we did. And as you can see, I've done lots of stories having to do with Mexico. This was the one on the right is was a travel piece about where to go in Mexico, and then this on the left is a book about photographs that were taken in Boys Town in Nuevo Laredo in like the 70s. And then, of course, in Austin and in Texas, we have our own version of Mexican food. It's called Tex-Mex. So on the left here is a menu and branding identity we did for this restaurant. It's very popular in Austin. And on the right is kind of a best-selling cookbook all about this weird thing called Tex-Mex. And then this is one of my favorite stories I did. I've always been infatuated with Mexican wrestling and the masks and El Santo and all that. So what we did was I hired a photographer, and we actually decided to cover sort of the minor leagues of Mexican wrestling. So we did this piece called Masked Marvels of Mexico. We did most of the photographs in Monterrey and Saltillo and around there. And here's, this is me actually again at a photo shoot with these guys that were the Ninja Turtles. I think this was in Saltillo. And then there's a famous photographer named Mary Ellen Mark who was photographing circuses all over the world. She photographed the Vietnamese circus, she photographed the Russian circus, and the Indian circus. And so I hired her to come to Mexico City, and she photographed the Mexican circus. And this was the feature that we did. And then I had the idea that in Texas we sort of have our own circus, which is the rodeo. And so she's a very famous photographer from New York. She actually has passed away now, but this was the opening spread to this whole thing that she did on the Texas, on the rodeo, small town rodeo, kind of like the small town circus, where she went to 14 different rodeos, and she spent 3 months documenting this. This is a photographer, an illustrator named Brad Holland, a very famous illustrator in New York, who got infatuated with the rodeo clowns, the bullfighters, basically, in the rodeo. And so he went to a bunch of different rodeos and did these beautiful paintings. And then we did all the branding and advertising and marketing for a tequila that's actually Texas tequila. It's actually made in Mexico, but it's called Republic Tequila. So the owner, I decided to feature him. So on the right there, that guy is actually the owner, wearing the red bandana. And so the shape of the bottle is in the shape of Texas. And it had these sort of funny sort of Texas quotes. And I love these photographs so much, I decided to do a Pentagram paper, which is a little publication that we do, Pentagram partners do, photographing cowboy poets. And so once again, I sort of embraced where I'm from. So I went back, I found out that they have a cowboy poetry convention in Alpine, Texas. So I sent this photographer down there, and he photographed these poets. And then we got permission to run some of their poems. Now their poems are just as corny as all get out. They're very, what you think cowboy poetry would be. But we sent this book all over the world because all my partners have sent it to all their clients and all, in London and in Berlin and all over. And it was really a big hit. And once again, I think like really embracing sort of where you're from is a way to go. And so we did lots of, this was a story about these lawmen chasing down a horse thief in Texas. This was a whole feature we did on the cowboy hats, where I hired a fashion photographer from Milan, actually, to photograph cowboy hats. And then I was asked by Sappi Paper Company, which is a South African paper company, to do this project where they took the map of the United States and they divided it into 6 parts. And they asked the designer from each region to take this map that was done kind of like just a line work map. And you could do anything you wanted to. So of course what I did was what we call a Texas brag map, which is I took that map and I made Texas bigger than every other state. And then I crammed in all the other little states, misspelled them on the map. And then everything on the map says, it says the world's largest this, the world's greatest this, the world's biggest this. And then right there where Austin is, it says home of the world's best graphic design firm, which of course is my office. So I love doing stuff like that. And then of course I love luckily the shape of Texas has kind of like become our logo. So I use it all the time, as you can see. But this version on the right was I was asked to speak at an event in Vermont. And so I really wanted to make fun about how small Vermont is compared to Texas. So I crammed all the states into the shape of Texas there. And then on the far right over there, you can see that for the 20th anniversary of Texas Monthly, I had this painting done where the only thing on the globe is the shape of Texas. That's what we call a classic brag map. It's that whole Texas sense of humor about everything's bigger and better in Texas. And then of course, I love big hair because I'm from Texas. And so this woman on the cover here, she sent me a photograph of herself with her hair like that, done like a cowboy hat. And she sent me a letter and said, "Dear Mr. Stout, I love to wear my hair in the shape of a cowboy hat. Would you put me on the cover?" And so we tracked her down. She'd been divorced about 3 times by the time we found her, put her on the cover. And then we photographed all these women with big hair. And that woman with the pink hair on the opening over there, she was the tea cart lady at the first cafeteria where I went to college at Texas Tech. So I went and tracked her down. She had no idea why we wanted to photograph her, except for she has a giant pink hairdo. And then, of course, I've done magazines for universities all over the country. This is one for Loyola Marymount University, which is in Los Angeles. This alumni of LMU designed this popular cartoon animation called Johnny Bravo. So I had the idea of making his hair really big. So that's the front and the back cover. And then back to Austin, since it is live music capital of the world. This is a story about Lyle Lovett, who's a kind of country western singer. This is one about Willie Nelson. He's famous for his guitar, so I spelled out the word Willie with the tiger. And this was a whole piece I did on abandoned movie theaters all over Texas, where we got permission to go inside and photograph them. Then back to my community, a poster that I did for the Austin Film Festival, where I turned this Hollywood image into a Texas flag. Instead of a Lone Star flag, though, it's 2 stars. And then this was a poster I did for a guy in Austin who was building schools in impoverished communities all over South Africa, all over Africa. And then I do this thing called Pitch and Kucha, which is a speaking event. And so we've done 30 of them now. They have these all over the world, these speaking events. They probably have one here in Mexico City. But it's always fun because this is a project where I do a silkscreen poster and I don't have a client, so I can do whatever I want. And then back to, once again, where I'm from, this is a photographer, who's a really dear friend of mine named James Evans, who's been living in the Big Bend for, very desolate, for like over 20 years, 25 years. So this was the front cover and the back cover. I came up with the title for it, Crazy from the Heat, because he's been living out there in the desert too long. Kind of semi-crazy. And then back, again, to my personal life. You saw at the beginning that my father was in the Marine Corps, and I moved every year when I was growing up. But the reason I was born in Alpine, Texas, was because my dad played baseball for a semi-pro baseball team in Alpine, and he played for this gentleman wearing the cowboy hat right there, who owned a really big ranch in West Texas. And he's the reason why my dad was able to go to college, and because he played baseball for him. And so there's a little film. Here's the end of the film.
30, 35 years as a graphic designer. But the first book I ever wrote was about the Alpine Cowboys. And Coconut Field, as you see, is this beautiful baseball field. It's the home of the Alpine Cowboys. The reason I ended up doing this book about this very obscure baseball team in the middle of nowhere is that my father played for the Alpine Cowboys in the 50s. They had like a team photographer that most of that time, and he shot with a large format camera. And just beautiful photographs.
All things meaningful kind of connecting one's life, and stewardship has always been a big part of mine. And as Chris and I are
These are the people who own that ranch
stewards
now.
of this land,
In Alpine.
I think Mr. Herbert was a steward not only of this ranch and this land, but he was also a steward of baseball and those families, the players, and I think DJ is a steward of that store.
I guess you could say that I'm a regionalist.
That's James Evans, who did the Crazy from the Heat Woman Forum.
I mean, he's a
Photographer.
folklorist and writer from Texas, particularly Austin, who really believed in the power of regionalism. We would always say that, nothing really great has ever, come from just trying to be global. The thing I love most about Texas is its character. Anything from cowboy hats and cowboy boots to politicians that act a certain way to oilmen. I love taking advantage of that in my design.
There's something about living in a big empty space where people are few and distant under a great sky and a wind that never seems to rest. There is something about that big country that not only tells an individual how small he is, but steadily tells him who he is. I think that's a perfect description of Alpine and Lubbock and West Texas, and I think that the self-awareness that DJ has so strongly is very rooted in the experiences that he had in those places.
So thank you very much.